Valerie, this film. Why this film?
There's a whole area of application of geometry, sacred geometry, which has never been shown to be integrated into human movement. We know how it is in painting. We know how it is in architecture. We know how it is in music. We know how it is in other art forms. But nobody has really brought out how sacred geometry is embodied in human movement. And that is what Rudolf Laban discovered and put forward. And if we don't say it, it'll be lost. His work has got two very clear paths. This space harmony stuff, which is what he talks about, which is how space is embodied in movement, and how that particular space has maps and is based on geometry. You can either take it by the way you use it towards this esoteric experience, or you can take it simply straightforward into choreographic innovation.
Which, of
you
course,
can break
Forsyth's done.
Yes, and you
hasn't it?
break all the rules, and you have marvelous new ideas, and you just experiment for the sake of making art. Now, this other is different. You do it for the sake of the impression that it makes on the mover.
If you use the word sacred geometry, then you have to define what you mean by the word sacred. You have to ask yourself, what is sacred? Well, the interesting answer to that is that everybody holds something sacred. It isn't a matter of whether you're a sort of philosophically minded person or a religiously minded person, whatever. I mean, some people hold money sacred, some people hold their dog sacred, and who's to say any of them are wrong? But my definition of the word sacred is a little bit more specific, and my definition would be that which is essential to human life. What is sacred is that which is essential to human life.
Well, sacred geometry is about mathematical ratios. It's about the harmonics. It's about proportion. And it's about how all those things are embodied in things that are there in our life, like light, like music, like cosmology, like all living matter.
What we are interested in here is this aspect of Laban's metaphysics which has been ignored. The sacred or spiritual dimension.
The dimensional cross. It's the very basic scale, and it allies or embraces or combines the body and space through lifting up beyond oneself, down through one's center, connecting down to the earth, the crossing over, horizontality, and the opening out toward the horizon, and the retreating back and advancing forward into whatever's going to go on in front of you.
And of course, Laban's used Plato's 6 fundamental directions of up, down, side, side, forward and backward. And in fact, Plato has 7 directions. The return to place,
Centre,
which he sees as a
use.
location.
And we use that. And of course it's the octahedron is the form that is used, the scaffolding, of which these are the central vectors. It's the octahedron, which is the second of Plato's.
Polygons.
Yeah.
He proceeded to say that the molecules of matter that make up the universe, the most important one was this one, which was the molecule of fire.
Now the tetrahedron is the first of the Platonic solids. It is literally like a pyramid. And it is said to be the crystal of ecstatic behaviour.
The second molecule, which is the molecule of air, is this figure here, known as the octahedron, because it has 8 faces. The molecule of earth was the cube, which we're all very familiar with. And the molecule of water was this one, which is the icosahedron, which I know von Laban was most involved with and used very creatively.
The internal construction of the icosahedron is made of 3 intersecting planes. In geometry, they're called the sagittal plane, the horizontal plane, and the vertical plane. And in fact, Laban called them by the rather prosaic terms of the wheel plane, the table plane, and the door plane.
Each of these planes through this figure Laban used for a dancing exercise or a sense of awareness. You become aware of these 12 points of this figure around you.
Well, it's the wheel plane, is it not? It's the wheel plane.
Yes.
The plane that goes through one like a wheel, advancing and retreating. And here's a study on the plane. Here's the study on the vertical plane, and the 4 corners of it are used, and the sides of it are used, and the liveliness of the height of it is used.
here we have one dancer.
And she putting the three parts of the study together.
The planes have very particular proportions. They're golden mean or golden section ratios, and this is a very significant proportion for sacred geometry.
I think probably if you wanted to talk about life as a dance, this would be a lovely example of it. This little creature here has slowly created this form as it's grown, but the spiral in here is what's called a logarithmic spiral, and it's based directly on the golden mean.
The golden section's a very special proportion, isn't it? I would I think it's easiest to sort of see it in the arm, in the sense that it's about the relationship of that to that. I mean, this is smaller, but it's smaller in a particular way than that, isn't it? And its smallness is exactly the same as that is in relation to the whole thing from here to here.
In the same way that on the human hand, the distance between here and here, here and here, here and here, this also is based on the same principles.
You find the golden mean in abundance in nature and also in the biology and anatomy of our human form.
These two men are using the harmonic opposites of each plane, which, when combined, form a scale of 6 movements.
And this is a more dynamic variation of this same scale, the axis scale, involving changes of front.
This is the equator scale, and the equator scale flows round the axis scale, and it is done in the classic sacred geometry way. The whole of their being, their legs, their arms, their head, their body, all in unison. And then at this point, they go into choreographic. So they shift. They're using the same directions as before, but the embodiment is open to their own choice. Well, we ought to talk about who the man was.
Well, you can do that.
Who was he?
Who was he?
Rudolf Jean-Baptiste Attila Laban de Varalia is his name, a Hungarian, born in 1879. Now, he started as an architecture student and as a painter, so he's very well acquainted with geometry. There's a period when we're not quite sure exactly what he was doing, but he turns up in Munich, and we know he's there from 1910. It is in those 3 years between 1910 and 1913 that tumultuous things are going on in Munich. They really are. And the people who he's around, you've got Vasily Kandinsky and Arnold Schoenberg, and then Rudolf Steiner, all asking the same question: how do we embody the spiritual in art? And then by 1912 and 13, Laban has opened his school and begins this tumultuous, really like a torrent of innovation and research right the way through up until 1936, when he leaves Germany. That is those many years of absolute torrent of innovation. Well, this is the A scale, and the A scale is a circuit which comes back to itself. That's why it's called a scale or a ring, and it consists of 12 movements, which are harmonically organised. They pass from one plane onto the next, and that repeats. Now in this A scale, they're dancing it in canon, and they're dancing it with change of front.
You trained with Laban. Was this underlying spiritual belief system evident in his teaching?
Well, yes, I was a student with him and stayed with him for 12 years. It wasn't overt. I think that's very understandable, because when he started in this country after the war, 1946, he'd been in Germany. He was in a very vulnerable position, very open to criticisms, that he'd had connections and so on with Nazism and all that kind of thing. And I think he was, and Lisa Ullman, who was his other half at that time, were very nervous, very nervous. And he knew throughout his life that you don't tell this to everybody. It's not stupid that Rosicrucianism, which was what he embraced, is a secret.
Rosicrucianism is a movement of esoteric ideas which began in Germany around the early 17th century. Basically, one can say that there are two essential features of Rosicrucianism. One is the idea that we are on the threshold of a new age, a new golden age for humanity. The other essential characteristic is a holistic view of the world, bringing together religion, science, and the arts into one unified whole. And I think it was this in particular that must have appealed to Rudolf Laban.
Well, Laban was a leading figure in the Monte Verita community, and that's near Ascona in Switzerland.
Monte Verita was an early New Age colony set up around 1900 by a group of poets, artists, musicians, and theosophists. They practiced a mixture of alternative spirituality, nudism, free sexuality, dietary reform, and many forms of artistic activity. Laban was a key member of the group.
But it was in fact in Switzerland, in Ascona, that he really worked to forge his praxis. I like to call it praxis. And when Mary Wigman arrives, and Laban has his group of dancers.
Well, we have to see it as summertime and wintertime, because it's summertime Ascona and wintertime Munich.
Well, any Rosicrucian would know the Hermetic saying, as above, so below, meaning that everything on earth has its counterpart in the heavens. So, for example, the geometrical proportions in the human body are reflected also in the universe. So if you were to express one of these sacred proportions through movement, you would be putting yourself in touch with a principle that is present in the universe and in yourself.
So could we say that as we move within these forms or with these scaffoldings as concepts, we actually produce the forms? They unfold from the organic geometry of our bodies.
Well, the grammar that underpins them is so basic, like the idea of a linear form and a surrounding arc around it. I mean, those are such basic things. Take this glass of water. There it is. It has a verticality and it has a surrounding. I mean, that is it. It is so basic. Now, when you see the full possibilities of how that manifests itself in movement, I've just done it there.
Yes.
I've gone there and I've gone there. It is a fundamental form. And here, the dancers are playing choreographically with the idea of an axis, a line in space, and surrounding it. There's the axis, and now she surrounds it. There's the axis, and now she surrounds it. There's the axis, and now she surrounds it.
This is the embodiment with the whole group of the line in space.
The lines in the kenosphere, that means that, where you can reach, then can develop into lines right through into the shared space. It's showing how the same concepts can work through the stage space as they do through the personal space of one's own kenosphere. And here, the same line, but the manifestation is choreographic.
He doesn't often cite his influences, does he, in his writing? But in Koroitics, we've got a very direct reference to Plato's Timaeus and direct references to Pythagoras and more diffuse references to the Neoplatonic or the Gnostic perspective, with this very deep spiritual perspective. So looking at the Platonic Pythagorean point of view, they talk about geometry, and here, in a sense, we are dancing geometry.
What is really important about those things is that Laban showed how they are embodied, and the difficulty comes if you get stuck in Plato and Pythagoras as theory and don't understand at all how it is embodied in movement. It is the practice that is the key innovation of Laban. These are curved pathways and then curved gestures in the space which end up in a curved body design. And of course, historically for Laban, these are connected with the idea of attitude in ballet and the development of ballet. So that attitudes in places that ballet doesn't make attitudes in. And then that's contrasted with, the development of the line, which is done as a zigzag, line and again. There's a line, and he comes back on himself, and then he goes on the line again. The zigzag ends in a projection in space, and Laban sees that as a development of the arabesque in ballet, taking that arabesque into places that are not in the normal lexicon. Well, the seven ring is a very special ring for Laban. It is called a seven ring because it has 7 parts. It has 3 parts of a zigzag, 1, 2, 3 zig, and then there are in fact 4 different units that go into the curve, which bring it back to where it began. Here's the zigzag. And there's the surrounding in space coming into the surrounding body design. Now he goes up into zig, zag, and now he surrounds in space and comes back to his curve. Now those two do the same. Do it together and you'll see that they're in harmonic opposite. Their zigzags go into opposite places and their curves counterbalance each other and they end up in harmonically opposite places.
There's no doubt that 7 is an incredibly key number. It's made up of 3 and 4. If you're going to talk about it being composite, it's made up of 3 and 4. 3 is the symbol of harmony and consciousness, And 4 is the number of the world, because it's earth, air, fire and water. So everything material, anything square is about the material world. Anything which is triangular is about the movement of the spirit. And what I can do, I hope, towards the lens is the spirit comes from its unknown source, comes into manifestation, it maintains in manifestation, and then it returns back to its source. That is the threefold movement of the spirit, it's called.
Valerie, when did Laban discover these 7 rings?
Well, he published them on his 70th birthday. He made his birthday card, if you like, or his thank you birthday card, and he asked me as a student to write them down. And that notation takes the form of a little card, which he sent round.
I seem to remember when you taught the 7 rings, you spoke about a karmic shift.
Yes.
Could you say something about that?
Well, in Rosicrucianism, there is a belief of the continuous cycle of birth to death and death to rebirth, and that during the birth to death there is a union of soul and genes, if you like, which makes a person, and at the moment of death those two things part, and the soul continues and the genes turn to dust. This cycle of life to death is going to go on forever, unless and until the soul, during its period of death to rebirth, is revitalizing itself, is becoming more, shall we say, nearer to the epitome of spirituality, in which case, instead of going on round the circle, it is able to veer off into infinity. Now, in the 7 ring, this is sort of encapsulated in one incredibly intense little special form, because your axis scale is going to go on and on and on and on and on, and in the same way, this equator around it is going to go on in a life here. There's the life bit there. There's the, death to life, life to death, death to life. That is going to go on and on and on, unless the two things collide. Now, in a 7 ring, they collide, and you've got the zigzag, and you're expecting it to go on, but no, the karmic shift occurs, and you shift into the other one, and it comes to there. So, dim bam bam, karmic shift. And a karmic shift is that magical moment in Rosicrucianism when the life to death cycle is finally broken and the karmic shift enables you to go off.
Escape. Now we've got young dancers expressing these forms. What about older people? Are they going to look at this material and say, well, what has this got to do with me?
Well, it's because of that, isn't it, that we have been experimenting with how to make this stuff available to young, old. Large, small. All sorts of people, because after all, people are people, whether you're 84 or 8. And so, of course it's available to them, but it's like these two things, you can go that way and make it simple and make it absolutely an experiential, terrific experience, or you can go zooming off in the other direction, have superb dancers, and make incredible dances. It's just a choice as to which way you want to take it. It is there to be used.
But it's such a unique project. It occurs to me that can we find anyone else who has been so fascinated by human movement? It seems to me to have been quite a unique way of being in the world and a unique way of looking at the world.
Yes, and he says he hopes, well, how does he put it? He says, I haven't got a method. I don't want people to follow my method, but I want, if I leave anything behind, it is for people to become acutely aware of their own movement, the power of it, and the potential of it for harmonic living.